So this is a really good framework for even having those types of conversations. In the scenario where you're finding a person who's part of your team is starting to be a bit like bored, right? So what's a way to engage with them about the S-curve? Because it's a fantastic tool, but how do you even have the conversations about this, right? Because obviously there's a part where, it's a kind of like a reflection on their existing role, but then there's a part where we're talking about the things that are next. And this is kind of, I think, so you call it the explorer, right? So now they're masters, but they now also have to start exploring some other areas. So what's a way to do that where, I don't know, there's a higher chance of success that they're going to choose the next thing?
So first of all, any manager who has that conversation with someone on their team is going to be deemed the best boss ever, right? Because they're basically saying to them, I believe in you. I want you to continue to grow. I'd like you to grow with me. I'd like you to grow at our organization, but I just want you to continue to grow. And so I think that's the starting point. The second thing that I would say is that one of the things you can do is you can draw this out and say to them something like, actually, let me tell you a quick story. There was a Kara Golden who owns a company called Hint Water, and here in the United States, it's very popular. And she had a person on her team, and she went to him and she said, "Hey, you're doing a fantastic job. Have you thought about what your next role is going to be?" He's like, "What do you mean my next role? Do you think I'm not doing a good job?" She's like, "No, I think you're doing a great job, but I know," and she didn't use this language, "but I know that you're going to get to the top of your curve and you're going to start to get bored. And so you need to have a plan for what you're going to do next." And so I think there's that conversation of, here's what's going on in your brain. Once you get to the top of the curve, you've got to have a plan for what you're going to do, either to continue to stay in this role and to thrive, or to do something else. And if you're going to do something else, you need to be thinking strategically about backfilling who's going to take on that role behind you. Now, what I thought you were going to ask, and by the way, this is just a reminder. This is why, for anybody who has ever said to themselves, I'm really good at this, but I can no longer keep doing it, that is why. It's the dopamine. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I forgot my point about the dopamine. Yeah. That part's super important too. Yeah.
Right. That's what's going on. So now more often though, what's going on is that people get to the top and they're like, this is pretty comfortable. Like their identity's intact, it's status quo. They're a little bit bored, but doing something new is kind of scary and they don't want to do something new. So you now, as a manager, have this person who you're saying, they're starting to underperform. I mean, they were doing a fantastic job, but they're kind of dialing in and I'm not sure what to do now because I'm starting to feel resentful. And if they underperform for too long, then our relationship's going to fray and I might have to fire them. And you don't want to do that. So again, you can use the S-curve to have that conversation to say, here's what's going on in your brain, dopamine. And by the way, because you're not spending a lot of cognitive capacity to map new memories, that means you've got a lot of latent innovative potential because you've got capacity to learn and to grow and to stretch. And so I need you to figure out what you're going to do to challenge yourself. Because if you'll challenge yourself, that means you're going to help challenge the team, which means you're going to help challenge the organization. So what do you want that to look like? And so that's where I would start that conversation.
In the pandemic times, if the world is falling apart and then the role is not providing any type of satisfaction or happiness because they're complete masters, right? Then obviously they're going to be like, well, the whole world is just not a happy place. So the thing I can change is I can change my role, right? And so I think that's a really good kind of reflection. But I think then they're now at the mastery stage. So maybe now they're starting to lose some of the dopamine. And so now they have to start something else. And so that dopamine is going to take a while to start to hit again, right? Like, is there a way to kind of to reignite the dopamine faster? You know what I mean?
There is. Okay, so there's a couple of thoughts. So in mastery, there are two phases. There's the anchor phase, and then there's the mountaineer phase. And so when you're in the anchor phase, that's basically, I'm at the top of the mountain. I did it. And so if you can take a moment and celebrate what you did and what you accomplished, emotions create habits. And so that celebration, this is something that BJ Fogg, who's a behavioral scientist, talks about. That is going to give you a little bit of dopamine as that willingness to just stop and say, look at what I did, and honoring and anchoring that behavior. Now, as mountaineer, you're going to have this thrill of I'm about to climb. So that's exciting, right? I'm going to do something new. We all think about new school year, new job. That's exciting, is anticipating that, even though it might be a little bit scary. But once we get there, we can do that. The challenge is that once you've made that decision and you're actually starting that new thing and your dopamine is dropping, what do you do there? And what I recommend there is this. Now that we know that launch point dopamine drops, sweet spot, it's spiking, mastery, it's flat, what can you do at the launch point to get your dopamine to spike? And here's the hack. You set small, ridiculously small goals. So yeah, it's maybe going to take me 6 months or a year to get off the launch point overall, but there are things that I can do every day that will allow me to get that little spike. And I'm going to give you a very simple example, which is I decided that I wanted to start running. And I didn't say I'm going to run 30 minutes a day or even 15 minutes a day, because I wasn't doing any of that. And the odds that I was going to keep doing it, given what I had allocated my time, that wasn't going to happen. So I said, I'm going to run 5 minutes a day and 30 seconds running, 30 seconds walking. And I'm going to increase it by 10 seconds a day. And this was building on James Clear's work when we had him on the podcast. But what that did then, Alex, is that I'm at the launch point thinking I want to get to run a 5K. I couldn't run a 5K then. But by doing those super small goals, I was going to meet it every day. And chances are I was going to beat it if I wanted to. So now all of a sudden, in this short time frame, I'm getting all this dopamine. And the dopamine's building. The dopamine's giving me momentum to move into the sweet spot.
I like that. It's like those small little steps every day that can push you towards something, or that can just take you closer. I'll come back with an example I have just for myself, because
I want to hear one. Yes.
Hey, like, it's not solved yet. This is a part of like the S-curve challenge, right? So, but we'll come back to that. So I read that the ideal place in terms of the team allocation is to have 60% of the team in the sweet spot. That it shouldn't be 100%, it should be 60%. So could you talk about that? Because I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah,
and I think it's something that kind of can help just to put this together for people.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that as we've been talking about this, up until now, we've been talking about using the S-curve to demystify personal growth. We've been talking about it, using it as a talent development tool, as a retention tool. Because if you're thinking about where people are growing, they're less likely to resign. But you can also use it to build a team and to optimize your team for growth. And so what we recommend you do as a starting point is to think of a standard bell curve distribution and say, okay, I want to think about having 60% of my people in the sweet spot of their growth. Why? Because they're asking questions of why do we do it like this? But they're also competent enough that they can answer questions like, well, here's what we've tried before. Why don't we try this? And so they can really wrestle a challenge and do it competently, but do it in an engaged way. So you want 60% of your people there as a starting point. Now, I also recommend that you have 20%, no more than 20% at the launch point. Why? Well, on the one hand, they are very capable of asking questions like, why do we do it like this? Whether it's a brand new college graduate or a new CEO, they're looking with fresh eyes. They're not blinded by familiarity. And they require training. They require encouragement. They require, it's a heavy lift to help. There's a lot of support that's required in order for someone to build momentum off the launch point of the curve. So if you've got 60 or 70% of your people there, that's a challenge. And by the way, that's what happened in the world back in March of 2020. All of us were at the launch point of how do we deal with the pandemic curve? So it was tough for all of us. even whether we were directly or indirectly affected by it. So then in mastery, you don't want more than 20%, because on the one hand, you have people who can very much anchor everybody else and say, here's why we do it like this. And they have the institutional memory. But because they're getting a little bit potentially bored, they're not they're answering questions, but not necessarily asking questions. And so and also from a team organization configuration standpoint, if you've got 80% of your people in mastery, and this is what's happened over the past couple of years with all the baby boomers retiring, you've got a pipeline problem. So it's also, you're optimizing for growth with this 20-60-20 in terms of asking and answering questions about innovation, but you can also use it to think of it from a pipeline perspective of, we need to have enough people at the launch point so that over time they can move into the sweet spot, and we don't all of a sudden have a whole cohort of people depart because they're all in mastery.
So for companies that have extremely fantastic retention rates, there's a danger of having a lot of people in the mastery level, right? And that's when they've been in the role for too long and the role's not changed, and potentially the company's not growing that fast. And so the roles are kind of becoming static, right? And what you kind of need is to be proactive, like in this process, and so that the company can stay competitive. Because if everyone in the company now starts to perform at 70%, you're never going to win in the competitive landscape that it is in 2022 and beyond, right? And so it's a really interesting concept to really be proactive in helping the team to continue to grow. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And again, you can take the assessment tool, but you can also just draw it out and be like, okay, where is everybody? And these are conversations that we have with people on our team of saying to them, in fact, a contractor that we're working with, and you can do this with contractors as well, because presumably you bring in a contractor because they are in mastery, but have a conversation with them and say, hey, I hired you because you're in mastery and you can do this thing for me. But what is it that you want to do? What are some launch point things that you want to try? Because if you know that, then there's this contract that you're having with them of, you're going to help me grow and I'm going to help you grow. And if I can help you grow, then you're going to get the best work from people, because they're going to feel like, again, there's growth upside, and growth upside is a very strong predictor. As we talked about earlier, the great aspiration, that is a very strong predictor of how long someone stays in an organization.